about tonight, we've chosen a song I had the pleasure of recording in an album some years ago called Two in Love. Here it is, There Will Never Be Another You. This is our last dance together. This is all I want you to know. There will be many other nights like this, and I'll be standing here with someone new. There will be other songs to sing, another fall, another spring, but there will never be another
Check.
There will be other lips that I may kiss, but they won't thrill me like yours used to do. Yes, I may dream a million dreams, but how can they come true if there will never, ever be another you? Siempre que te pregunto que cuando con y dónde, tú siempre me respondes quizás, quizás, quizás. Y así pasan los días y yo desesperado, y tú contestando quizás, quizás, quizás. Estás perdiendo el tiempo pensando, pensando por lo que más tú quieras. ¿Hasta cuándo? ¿Hasta cuándo? Y así pasan. Y yo desesperado, y tú contestando quizás, quizás, quizás. Estás perdiendo el tiempo pensando, pensando por lo que más tú quieras. ¿Hasta cuándo? ¿Hasta cuándo? Y así pasan los días y yo desesperado, y tú contestando quizás, 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 quizás. much. You know, when you're winning or losing, but regardless of the outcome of the lyrics, there's always something beautiful about the whole idea. Maybe I should have saved those leftover dreams. Funny, but here's that rainy day. Here's that rainy day. They told me about, and I laughed at the thought that it might turn out this way. Where is that worn-out dream that I threw aside near? Funny how love becomes a cold, rainy day. Is here. Love is funny, or it's sad, or it's quiet, or it's mad. It's a good thing, or it's bad. But beautiful to take a chance, and if you fall, you fall. And I'm thinking I wouldn't mind at all. Love is cheerful, or it's gay. It's a problem, or it's play. It's a heartache either way. But beautiful. And I'm thinking, if you were mine, I'd never let you go. And that would be but beautiful. That would be
Good morning, distinguished. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Please, may I request that we all find our seats. The program is about to start, please. May I request that we all find our seats, please. On behalf of the Mabogunje family, the University of Ibadan, and the Department of Geography, it's my pleasure to welcome us all to this first-year anniversary lecture to celebrate an icon of the university, an icon of Nigeria, an icon of the world, who has joined the Saints Triumphant. It's my pleasure to invite a number of people to the high table. And the first person that is coming to the high table is the chairman of the occasion. It's my pleasure to request that Dr. Yemi Ogunbiyi comes to the high table, please. May I also request that we bring the woman who shared the greatest part of Professor Mabogunje's life to the high table. It's my pleasure to invite Justice Titi Mabogunje, retired, to the high table. May I also crave the indulgence of this gathering to invite to the high table the representative of the special guest of honor, His Excellency, former President of Nigeria, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, who is being ably represented by Professor Peter Okebukola, former Executive Secretary of the NUC. We have all come to listen to a lecture, and it's only very appropriate that I invite the guest lecturer to the high table. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Professor Taibat Lawansin. Having invited our allegios, it's proper that we invite the chief hosts and the chief hostess of today. It's my pleasure to invite to the high table the head of the Mabogunje family, Professor Tokbe Mabogunje. It's also my pleasure to invite the first child of late Professor Mabogunje, the current Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos, Professor Folashade Ogunshola, to the high table. distinguished ladies and gentlemen, having constituted the high table, it's my pleasure to request that we all rise for the National and University of Ibadan anthems.
Please, shall we all stand so we can pray? Our Heavenly Father, we bless your holy name that this day has come to pass. We thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your mercies. It's already a year that we lost our daddy, Professor Mabogunje. And through this 1 year, the Lord has been faithful. Thank you for the family. Thank you for looking after them. Thank you for the department that we welcome you into our midst. Have your way among us this morning in the name of Jesus. Let everything we shall do be to the honor and praise of your name. And at the end of it all, let all honor and glory and majesty be unto you now and forever. Amen.
Thank you very much for that very short prayer, sir. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we already introduced members of the high table. So it's my pleasure now to invite the chairman, Dr. Yemi.
The representative of our former president and head of state, Professor Peter Kibobola. I understand the Vice Chancellor is on his way. My Lord, Honorable Mrs. Titilola Mabogunje, our auntie and wife of our late father. Kabisi Alailu, I can see that Kabisi is here. Kabisi, you're welcome, sir. Very distinguished members of the community. I see some of my former teachers here. When I came in here as a young 20-year-old to study, and I recall that Professor Bolanle was already here at that time. I want to especially welcome her. Welcome her. And I see some of my other teachers. I see that Professor Shomi is here. I didn't study archaeology, but again, when I arrived here, Prof was already here on this campus. I want to especially welcome her. Prof is now a reverend, I understand. Other very special members of this community. I'll come back to the high table. I want to especially welcome our guest speaker, Professor Taibat Lawansin. Members of the extended Mabogunje family present here, particularly Professor Tokwe Mabogunje, and of course my younger sister, Shade Ogunshola. I especially welcome them and other members of the clan. On behalf of the children and extended family of the late Emeritus Professor Akinlawon Ladipo Mabogunje, I welcome us all to this event, the first year memorial lecture since his death on August 4 last year. For me, it's an honor to be here, being called upon to be chairman as an event dedicated to the memory of one of Nigeria's finest academics, particularly at a time such as this in our country's history. It's not an honor that I take lightly. But let me share with you a lighter side to that story. There's a lighter side to the story of being chairman today. Because as I look around this room, I'm saying to myself, yes, you know that story from Enaro's book, How to Be a Nigerian. When you appoint a chairman, the chairman starts by saying, well, why did you appoint me? I mean, there is a former head of state, there's a former vice chancellor here. You didn't ask them to do chairman. Why me? But then he goes on to play the role of chairman with so much glee. He enjoys it, even though he pretends. He feigns some modesty by saying, I should not be chairman. Other people should be chairman. But I have some news for you. This event, I'm looking around this room and saying to myself, is there a better chairman than myself? And I'm saying to you, there is none. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. And I'm saying, I don't recall that, I can't see that there's anybody in this room whom Professor Mabogunje met before he met me. And Auntie Titi has to also bow to me here. Because when Professor Mabogunje met me in 1953, I was only 6 years old. He met me when I was 6 years old in Kanu. And let me tell you the story. So Prof came from this campus. He was on holidays. I was born in a house, 29 Etkin Road, that belonged to Mama Ijebode. Mama Ijebode was the mother of Professor Mabogunje. So I was born there. So sometime in 1953, Prof was on holidays apparently from school and came to Kanu. And Mama Ijebode brought this handsome 22-year-old to see my father. My father was something of a little playboy in those days. His nickname was Father Dandy. So Father Dandy took this young man out to a nightclub. Wanted to show him around. Now, I don't know what happened at the nightclub, but the next morning, Mama Ijebode came to the house and was screaming at my father and said, "What did you do to this young man? He came back last night and didn't seem very coordinated. What happened to him? What did you do to him?" Now, I didn't know this story until many years, actually in 1977. I arrived at Ibadan, at Ife, to start my teaching career. Professor Mabogunje came to see his old friend, Professor Boyade, and said, "Oje, this rascal, you know when I first met him?" Then he told my father the story. So I went back to my father and said, "Do you remember this?" He said, "Oh, yes, of course, I remember it." In fact, my father remembered the event, the date, the year, and he said it was a Saturday. He had just come back from a Masonic meeting and decided to take this young man out to a nightclub. And I said, "What happened there?" And I don't know what happened there. But the point I'm making is that, is there a better chairman than that 6-year-old boy who was a vicarious witness to the events of 1953? Now tell me, is there, even Auntie Titi has to agree that she was not there then, but I was there. So again, I thank us all for coming, and I thank all those who worked very hard to put this event together, particularly my younger siblings, Shade and Shegun, Sheung and Toki, Boyega and Navena, Bimpe and Femi, and of course, Shola and Simisola. Emeritus Professor Mabogunje deserves to be remembered and honored not just today, but always, essentially because of his pioneering work on urbanization in Africa. His magnum opus, Urbanization in Nigeria, preceded by an earlier work on Yoruba towns in his doctoral thesis, was the first compelling account of pre- and post-colonial histories of Nigerian cities. Professor Mabogunje's work outlined how the regulations affected the layout of such cities as Ibadan and Lagos in a language that was captivating and even emotional in places. That book was so influential that it affected how the real estate industry was built, not only in Nigeria, but also across Africa. Indeed, much of the conceptualizing work that went into making Abuja a new capital city relied extensively on that book. Father of Nigerian geography and the first African president of the International Geographical Union, Mabogunje's dream was to provide equitable shelter for developing communities, even in the face of inevitable urbanization. And this is why it's so fitting that our guest lecturer today, Professor Taibat Lawansen, an urban management and governance professor at the University of Lagos, can be described as an offshoot of the Mabogunje School of Urban Studies. For instance, her research focus on environmental justice and urban informalities is a reminder of some of Mabogunje's earlier works. And as many have acknowledged, the passion with which Professor Lawansen delivered our inaugural lecture entitled Alternative Urbanisms Beyond Utopian Visions of the Emerging African City last June at the Ade Ajayi Auditorium, University of Lagos, was a reminder that the legacy of Emeritus Professor Mabogunje is well and alive. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I do not wish to preempt the brilliant postulations of our guest speaker, but one does not have to be an expert to see that the mass movements of populations from rural to urban settings portends severe consequences for us and our universe. The United Nations estimates that by 2041, more than half of the world's population of 9 billion people will be living in urban areas, which could spell disaster for us in developing societies. The UN has broken that further by saying that at Nigeria's annual population growth of 7 million persons, we could be close to 500 million people by 2050, which is only 25 years away, making us the world's most populous nation after India and China. Our own National Bureau of Statistics corroborates some of these UN figures by revealing that close to 65% of our entire population, most of whom are resident in urban settings, is multidimensionally poor, which is another way of saying that they suffer simultaneously from multiple disadvantages, among them lack of access to proper health care, to affordable housing, to water, clean energy, and sanitation. As a layman, my contention on the subject is simple. Since urbanization is almost irreversible, the best way to overcome it is to work on its side effects and concentrate by improving the economic conditions of people experiencing poverty. Again, we are fortunate that Professor Lawansen is here to speak to us because our life's work is partly dedicated to finding ways around these looming nightmares. By the way, Professor Lawansen is married to a distinguished old boy of King's College, so I expect no less from her. And to Shade, Shegun, and the rest of the clan, this must not be a one-off event. Today's activities must be sustained as an annual gathering dedicated to the memory of an exemplary international scholar who embodied the best in Nigerian academia. Once more, I thank us all for coming and wish us all fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Please, can we give Dr. Ogunbiyi another loud round of applause? When he started his speech, he told us he did not believe that he deserved to be the chairman. But after he has spoken, we all agreed that he deserves to be the chairman, because I'm sure that with the exception of one or two people in this gathering, he's the one that knew Professor Mabogunje longest amongst us. Please let's appreciate Dr. Ogunbiyi once again. I was going to say that the man looks very young, but now that I think about it, he has been around for a very long time. So I know that he's a fairly old man. He's not a young man. So thank you. You tell me the secret, sir, before we leave this gathering. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the chief host of today was not here while we were introducing members of the high table. It's my pleasure to recognize the presence of the 13th Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, Professor Kayode Adebowale, MNI, FAS. Now, may I request the head of the Department of Geography, Professor Dixon Ajayi, to step forward for his brief remarks.
The chairman of this occasion, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, Mama Titilola Mabogunje, members of the Mabogunje dynasty here present, Kabiyesi, distinguished guests, members of the university community, let me welcome us all to this occasion of the celebration of 1 year of the passing of Baba. It all happened about a year ago, and we were all stunned. We thank God. The good Lord has been with the family, and the family is up to celebrating Baba on this occasion. Let me crave your indulgence to please recognize a few of the ancestors of the Department of Geography here present before I say anything about Baba. Professor Bola Ayeni is here present. Professor Olusegun Areola is here present. Professor Badegeshin, the former Vice Chancellor of Ladoke Akintola University, is here present with us. And the immediate past president, the 12th Vice Chancellor of this university, Professor Idowu Olayinka, is here seated with us. I am very sure there are a lot more Vice Chancellors who have been children to Baba, especially in the academic circle, here seated with us. I may not have seen any one of you around, but I recognize you all. Today we celebrate the icon. He is the father of geography in Nigeria. Don't let me extend it beyond that. He is the very first black to occupy the chair of a professor of geography in the Department of Geography here at University of Ibadan. His children are here. His academic children are here. And through his life, Baba demonstrated first in almost all spheres of geography, as will be attested to by Professor Bola Ayeni very shortly. Much more than I know about Baba. We are here to listen. So let me welcome you once again to this event. And I wish each and every one of us the very best. And journey messages back to our different destinations at the close of today. I welcome you all. Thank you.
That was the head of the Department of Geography, Professor Dixon Ajayi. The Department of Geography is situated in a faculty, and the faculty is within the university. The Vice Chancellor is the chief host. The head of the department has spoken, so it's only appropriate that I recognize the presence of the Dean of the Faculty of the Social Sciences. He's not here present, but he's been ably represented by Professor Dikiru Lai Yagbuyaju. Please, can you stand up for recognition, please? Thank you for coming, sir. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if we are to introduce all the important dignitaries in this hall today, I'm sure we will not leave here by 6 p.m. because we are all important in our various disciplines and in our own various spheres. So please, can we all appreciate ourselves for being here? Thank you very much. I recognize the presence of the immediate past Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Idowu Olayinka. You're welcome, sir. There is a slight adjustment to the program because of some other engagements. The representative of the special guest of honor has to leave. So it's my pleasure, therefore, to invite Professor Peter Okebukola to give us the goodwill message from His Excellency, former President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo.
Can we have the video, please? Chairman, whom the cap fits, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there is a video component of this message which will be played before. Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to be asked by His Excellency Dr. Olusegun Obasanjo, GCFR, to continue his remarks at this event of the first memorial lecture of Professor Mabogunje, who was like a father to me. When I visited Mama last week, I was hugely delighted to see her in excellent health and in high spirit. She was quick to show me family photos extensively displayed in the living room with Baba Professor Mabogunje beaming with smile in all the photos. Chairman, permit me to share some sentences from the reminiscences straight from the mouth of Baba Obasanjo, and I quote, "What do you write when a brother and a friend of more than 40 years is no more with us? First is to thank God for the life he lived and for calling him home at a ripe old age." Professor Mabogunje lived to be 90. On his 90th birthday on October 18th, 2021, I joined family and friends to celebrate him. I could not but notice his fitness, intellectual acuity, and the typical glitter in his eyes, and mild smiles which precursors is expressing his thoughts on national and international issues. I conjecture that many of Akin's schoolmates and friends did not make it to 90 years. So it's a measure of grace of God that his age dial swung beyond his 90th birthday. Akin was aware of this, and he acknowledged God's favor in his classic autobiography entitled A Measure of Grace. Looking at his life, his achievements, and his standing within and beyond the shores of Nigeria, one can truly conclude that God was kind to him. The road I walked with Professor Mabogunje for over 45 years, and I'm still quoting Baba Obasanjo, is worth recalling. The first intersection of our paths was when I arrived in Ibadan in 1967 as area commander. From the brilliancy I noticed in Akin as first contact in town and gown, other interactions followed until I went to the war front when in preparation of post-Civil War development plan. Mabogunje and Tunji Aboyade separately and collectively interacted with me. I cultivated very close friendship with both of them when I became Chief of Staff and later as military head of state. Akin was particularly useful as a geographer in our sighting, of the new capital of Abuja. Aside their academic engagement, Akin and Tunji took on rural development undertaking in Awe and Ijebu environs, on venturing into investment in banking with encouragement from Sam Asabia. We made Akin the chairman board of directors of the First Interstate Merchant Bank and later Unity Bank. Also, in the days I used to host a farmhouse dialogue on a number of subjects of national, sub-regional, and international interest. After leaving office as military head of state, Professor Mabogunje was a regular co-chair with me in the company of other participants such as Professor Tekena Tamuno, Adebayo Adedeji, Emmanuel Edozen, and a host of other personalities, and the report of which we also co-edited. I also found his contributions incisive, profound, and authentic. He was quite a warm, receptive, and homely personality, soft-spoken and generous with a smile and encouragement. In many ways, he had been a source of inspiration to millions of Nigerians. He left his positive marks at several levels: academic, policy making, training, research, business, administration, development, and leadership. His strong faith in God continued to empower him to teach others that nothing is impossible in the world if we have faith, courage, focus, commitment, and a true sense of history and sense of nation. He demonstrated that it is possible to combine truth, honesty, social conscience, hard work, humility, and unprecedented success in one's profession, while remaining a loyal and patriotic citizen. He was, by all standards, an illustrious Nigerian who blazed a trail in several areas of human endeavor during his lifetime and made noteworthy contributions to development of the major national institutions with which he was associated. He was a leading figure in African geography scholarship, judging from the seminal caliber and pioneering nature of his work, as well as the exceptional quality of students who passed through his hand. Little wonder he was named the father of African geography. End of quote. I recall that when I was executive secretary of the National Universities Commission 23 years ago, Baba Mabogunje was clearly my mentor, my father, my confidant, and all the issues that NUC at that time brought to the fore were we had Professor Mabogunje as our nursery. I would speak with him, and we'll say, okay, go this path. When he comes to Abuja, we have meals together, and he was simply awesome. He was the chairman, as President Obasanjo said, he was the chairman of the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library Center for Human Security and Dialogue, served as director. He was my chairman of my board. I miss him so much. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let's enjoy what promises to be a great lecture in memory of a great husband, father, grandfather, and scholar, Professor Mabogunje. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We all know that the man who sent him can talk, and Professor Okebukola too can polish the talk. So thank you very much for your polished talk, sir. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, now we are getting down to the business of the day, which is the lecture. But before we have the lecture, I'm going to invite Professor Bola Ayeni to present the concept note. Professor Bola Ayeni.
Chairman of this occasion, the Vice Chancellor, University of Ibadan, the Chief Host, our Mama, Chief Justice Mabogunje. Please allow me to stand on existing protocols while I read the concept note that prepares us for the lecture that I want to listen to today. On this occasion, of the 1-year anniversary of the passing away of our great Professor Akinlawon Ladipo. It is fitting that some dose of scholarship be part of the event, given the stature of Mabogunje himself. We've listened to the praises and the accolades passed on him, and I assure you he merited them all. Professor Mabogunje's scholarship and professional policy practice is object-oriented in its analytical paradigm. His research and practice acumen enabled him to conceptualize a wide range of spatial objects, including villages, towns, cities, regions, both within and outside national boundaries. The inaugural anniversary we're having today of the passing into glory of our professor discusses two of the things we have done for him. This is a special journal, the special issue of a journal we are launching, and also the lecture that we want to listen to. Both of these things dealt with just one factor of the many things Mabogunje concentrated on, cities. Now the Department of Geography and Regional Planning of the University of Benin City, worked in partnership with the Professor Mabogunje Tribute and Legacy Committee. We set that up last year to look into how we want to honor our professor. We've worked together and we have produced the Benin Journal of Geography, Planning and Environment, our special issue. This special issue is titled Urbanization and Environment, Planning and Managing Nigerian Cities Sustainably. The late professor was a leading global expert in urban geography. Although his study of cities was just his launching pad, his work extended into urbanization process itself and its impacts on urban and regional development, on housing and housing markets, on community organization and community development, population studies and environment, and so on and so forth. But what made Mabogunje special was his commitment, his breadth of knowledge, and his intellectual depth. Cities naturally impact its environment and the society in which it is built. Professor Mabogunje followed these leads. Cities are products of urbanization, and urbanization affects population dynamics, the most visible of which is urban migration. Urbanization is a product of industrialization and can impact the environment negatively and create problems for sustainable development. Rapid urbanization puts pressure on urban infrastructure and urban services and exacerbates unemployment and swells the population of the informal sector in which most urban dwellers eke out a living. Cities and the urbanization process that bring them about have almost limitless ramifications. And the journal we are launching today, addresses some of the issues I'm trying to describe. Cities have large populations and therefore meet threshold requirements for the production and provision of a variety of private and public goods and services. Furthermore, cities are regarded as engines of economic development because of the advantages conferred on them by agglomeration effects and economies of scale. Because cities provide the setting where these advantages can be reaped, they are preferred destinations for migration and investment. Quite often, the rate of migration extends the capacity of cities to provide jobs, to provide services and infrastructure. And this is the basis of the quest for sustainable cities. The issue of sustainable cities was one of the many challenges tackled by Professor Mabogunje in his works. The sustainable cities concept identifies that economic exclusion is manifested in high rates of inequality and that social exclusion disadvantages the poorest and most marginalized. Overall exclusion ultimately degrades the social fabric of cities, generating violence, crime, conflict, and a breakdown of social order. So, when well planned and developed, cities promote economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable assets. And when managed properly and efficiently, cities provide a unique opportunity to effectively address many of the problems of social inequality, economic development, and resilience to natural and man-made disasters. As we mark the first anniversary of Professor Mabogunje's passing, we must commit to upholding his legacy of sound scholarship in urban and regional development in all its ramifications. This is one major reason the Department of Geography is proud to be here today. Professor Taibat Lawansin, an erudite professor of urban management and governance at the University of Lagos, will address and capture many of the thoughts we described above in her keynote address, which is titled Pathways to Sustainable Urbanization in Africa, Learning on Mabogunje's Intellectual Legacy. This lecture will soon be presented. I want to thank you all for sharing in these moments. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the concept note for this. I surely represent a group of people in the Department of Geography. We are the direct descendants of Akinlawon Ladipo, and he taught us in the undergraduate school. He taught us in the postgraduate school. He supervised our thesis, master's PhD level, and we also worked with him in some of the things he is noted for. So, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you again to this meeting. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
If Professor Bola Ayeni is a descendant of Professor Mabogunje, then I'm sure we are third or fourth generation descendants of Professor Mabogunje. Thank you very much, sir, for that concept note. Now we're going to listen to the proper lecture. But who is this person that is going to give us the lecture? Yes, her name is Professor Taibat Lawansin. But who is she? Now I invite Dr. Ayodele Olajire of the Department of Geography to tell us who Professor Taibat Lawansin is. Dr. Olajire, please step forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Citation of the guest lecturer. I read thus. Taibat Lawansin is professor of urban management and governance at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, where she leads the Pro-Poor Development Research Cluster and serves as co-director at the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development. She holds a PhD in urban and regional planning from the Federal University of Technology, Akure, Nigeria. Our research focuses on the interface of social complexities, urban realities, and the pursuit of spatial justice in Africa. She is well known for our intersectoral work, which engages students, policymakers, local communities, and civil society actors. She is well published with over 70 articles in both academic and popular platforms. Taibat serves on the International Advisory Committee of the UN Habitat's flagship State of the World Cities. She is also a member of the editorial and advisory committees of major urban cities journals, including Urban Studies, Housing Studies, Urban Forum, the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, and Area Development and Policy. She is a member of the Board of Directors of the Lagos Studies Association and the Steering Committee of Future Earth's Urban Knowledge Action Networks. She is a pioneer, World Social Science Fellow of the International Science Council, a Fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Town Planners, and a proud alumna of the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center. With a great round of applause, let us give a rousing welcome to our guest lecturer, Professor Taibat Lawansin.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And it is a pleasure and a privilege and my very big honor to be standing before you to celebrate the life of someone on whose shoulders those I count as mentors stood on. I think I'm a third generation member of the Mabogunje School of Thought. So thank you very much for the honor. I will start by saying that Professor Mabogunje left a worthy legacy. And when I was invited to speak at this memorial lecture, I thought about what to say. And it reminded me of what you give to somebody who has everything. And for me, it was a case of what can we learn from the breadth of mind that Professor Mabogunje was? What can we learn from what he gave us? Because indeed, Professor Mabogunje was a blessing. He is a blessing. His intellectual depth is a blessing to us as Nigerians. I remember getting on a flight once in the early days. I hadn't even gotten my PhD then. And I sat next to somebody from Australia. And after asking whether I knew Fela of Nigeria, he asked if I knew Mabogunje of Nigeria. And I thought that was a very great honor. And so it was a very good experience for me to finally meet him so many years after. And we got on very well. We had some very interesting conversations. And what I really liked about Professor Mabogunje was his ability to cut through the chase. He was somebody who was very forthright, and he was a very interesting person, especially because of the extensive experience he had garnered. And in celebrating, today was his birthday. was his birthday. And no better day could be chosen to celebrate him, his life and his legacy. So I'll just start by sharing, I'm going to speak very briefly. And first I will speak on the African urban trajectory, what we have, you know, the reality of today, sustainable urbanization, whether it's a myth or possibility for us in Africa, and then do a deep dive into Professor Mabogunje's legacy, his intellectual legacy, and his practice legacy, and finally share a few thoughts about urban futures, better urban futures for Africa. So next slide, please. So African urban areas are growing at an unprecedented rate. Currently, we are moving towards an urban majority across African cities. And with this established growth, we find that we don't really understand how our cities are growing. I think we have a love-hate relationship with human settlements, and many of our governments really think about the urbanization phenomenon as something to be contended with. A lot of our policies across the continent have statements like reversing rural-urban migration. I'll get to that in a bit, and what Professor Mabogunje's thoughts were on that. But nonetheless, we're very close to an urban majority across our African cities. We have close to 8 African cities, including Lagos, as mega cities, which are cities of over 10 million people that come with their special, kinds of challenges and opportunities. We also have a plethora of secondary cities, which are cities of between 50 and 300,000 people. And that is really where the future of our continent is going to happen, in these secondary cities. We're going to find that the urban is going to be the reality of our lives, going forward, and how we respond to it is really going to determine whether we're going to have a prosperous future or not. Urbanization in African cities, next slide please. We have a median age of 19 across the African continent. So the average African is aged 19 and below. Unfortunately, our urbanization is also an urbanization of poverty, where we find that at least 60% of Africans living in urban areas are surviving on less than $2 a day. And they are employed in the informal economic sector, and they live in slum-like conditions. What that tells us is that we have a big problem in our hands, and we have to reconsider how we engage with the subject of urbanization. We are also confronted with some paradoxical issues with regards to thinking about urbanization. The first is the data issue, whereby we're leaning or relying on a lot of estimated data across the continent, and we are also, relying on data that is estimated and given to us by the multilateral agencies. And sometimes this data is skewed. Take, for example, the middle class. We find that the middle class accounts for less than 10% across the entire continent, but that is when you're considering the middle class to be those who are earning above $15 a month. And you and I know that earning above $15 a month is not a far stretch. And using those kinds of data gives us perhaps an unrealistic view of our cities that tends to sell a narrative about the future of African cities that may not necessarily serve the people of Africa. Next slide, please. And so we move on to the issue of sustainable urbanization, with the urban scale being the theater of our present and our future, and sustainability being touted as the way to go. We then need to consider whether the issue of sustainability in Africa is a myth or a reality. The international policy tells us that cities and human settlements are hubs of cultural and economic activities with modernized infrastructure where people have access to all the necessities of life, including shelter, water, sanitation, energy, public transport, and what have you. The SDGs also recognize the catalytic role of cities, and so SDG 11 is targeted at making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Now, the question is, what is sustainable? What is sustainable urbanization? And we find that given the reality in Africa of our pervasive urban poverty, and given some of the skewed data on which we rely on for our developmental purposes, we find that there is a contradictory message that is being pushed out about the future of African cities. And that is the Africa Rising narrative, which seeks to essentially capture the majority of African urban residents into a market that is pushed forward by technology, by modernism, by neoliberalism, and really, oftentimes, essentially for those who want to sell their goods. So we have examples like the Konza Technopolis of Nairobi, we have the Abuja Centenary City, and we have, even in Lagos, our own Eco-Atlantic City that is being touted as a smart city, as a sustainable city, and as really what the future of Africa should be. Professor Mabogunje had some interesting opinions about that. I quote one of them. Eco-Atlantic is built on land that was reclaimed from the Atlantic Ocean, and Prof said, now we think we can sand fill and extend the land into the ocean, which is what we're trying to do with the Atlantic City. Of course, some of the consequences of that will not be immediately obvious. And so we might enjoy the freedom of our technological capabilities for some years, but we do not know what we really displace. Now, I'm trying to show that this is not to say we can't exercise our God-given technological capabilities. If we're disturbing nature, nature has a way of coming back to us. And that is classic Mabogunje. Next slide, please. So the reality of our cities are this, Abeokuta, and we find that, next slide, please. We find that even though the utopian vision of African cities that is being sold to us is attractive, it's beautiful, we also see that oftentimes it is just very, very far from the realities of everyday African people. In Lagos, we carried out a study where we took maps, plans of some of these new African realities to communities where we live, communities where we work. And in Bariga, a community close to the University of Lagos, we spoke with a lady, Mama Nurse, who is a retired nurse and a homeowner in Bariga. And she said to us, the plan is beautiful, the new city is good, but who are they for? Where are normal people going to sleep tonight? And I dare say that the whole of Professor Mabogunje's life, his work as an intellectual and his work as a practitioner of urbanism, of geography, of sociology, of history, of business, focused on that. How are normal people, where are normal people going to sleep tonight, and how are they going to survive? And so I quickly go into looking at sustainable urbanization in Africa and what we can learn from Mabogunje's intellectual legacy. Professor Mabogunje wrote a lot of books. He wrote a lot of papers. He had a lot of opinions. He gave a lot of speeches. He spoke to many of us as a group and many of us as individuals. But there were certain things that really set his work apart. And the first was decolonial thinking. In fact, he challenged the relevance of Western explanations of development, especially as it relates to African urbanization. For him, the uncritical embrace of theories of urban growth from the North provided very little meaning to the reality of urbanization that we find. And so his work from the early days provided us with a theoretical focus that has prompted scientific investigations into understanding Africa and its urban areas, and also the context of national development. I remember a few years ago we were celebrating 50 years of the book Urbanization in Nigeria during the LSA conference, and Professor Mabogunje joined us. And one of the things we discovered was that the things he wrote about 50-something years ago, I think this was in 2018 or 2019, the things he wrote about then were still relevant to our work now, or to the reality of African cities now. And I remember that book. I dare say on the face of the earth, there is no student who has passed through a planning program, a geography program that has looked at geography of the world that has not had that book as recommended reading. And that is the gift that Professor Mabogunje gave to us, an opportunity for us to think about African urbanization through a lens of Africa, through a lens that is not reliant on theories from abroad. Next slide, please. The second compelling thing that sets Professor Mabogunje's intellectual work apart is the issue of multidisciplinarity. He was a geographer. He's known as a geographer, but he worked with history. He used instruments of history, of policy, of numbers to get his point across, to provide the superior argument for intellectual discourses. And he said to us in 2011, exploring wider fields of knowledge could do no harm, but expand your own intellectual horizon. If you are able to see the interrelationship between such fields of knowledge and your own area of preference, you would have gained immeasurably in your understanding of your field. Now, the challenge before us is that many of our disciplines still hug narrow disciplinary biases, and our students struggle with that because sometimes you're thinking about an issue and you get to hear, that's not planning, that's sociology, or that's not geography, that's math. Whereas it's a question that requires deep thinking and an appropriate methodology, even if that methodology is borrowed from another discipline. And so Professor Mabogunje set the stage for us to reach beyond our fields. I remember, this is taken from his book, A Measure of Grace. He said using this approach to his work was a bit more tasking. It took a lot more time, but at the end of the day, it was more beneficial, both to him as a scholar and to his students. Next slide, please. And a review of his book, Urbanization in Nigeria, from 1971. Dan Aronson said of the book that Professor Mabogunje introduces comparative theory and sophisticated methodology, and yet stresses principles and concepts of economy, location, and specialization, thus building a social scientific perspective into social and political history, and that he does his analysis as a committed citizen, thus relevantly relating scholarly abstraction to policy critique and recommendation. And that was him. You know, he was an intellectual of the highest order, but he was also one who was very realistic and sought to change his world through policy and through recommendations at the granular level. Another thing Professor Mabogunje gifted us with was the opportunity to carry out our research using mixed method analysis. And that goes also, you know, beyond the issue of multidisciplinarity, and also addresses some of the challenges we're facing in our knowledge institutions today. He said it's important for us to, you know, really give the intellectual argument or intellectual discourse the appropriate methodology, study a phenomenon using the appropriate methodology. And for many of us, because what we grew up with, what we learned with was strictly qualitative or strictly quantitative methodology, it then becomes difficult for us to cross the bridge or to understand that there is an alternative way of looking at the same question. He allowed us to move beyond the description of landscape changes in geography here and towards an understanding of process and explanation of change. And together, historical and quantitative methods helped to provide deeper insights into the development process. This was speaking about his 1980 book, The Development Process, A Spatial Perspective. And what mixed methods does for us is that it allows us to understand the what questions that we have, and then to move further to understand the why questions of the issue we're looking at, and more importantly, to help us to really craft the how when we're going into finding solutions. And so those were three things that I believe Professor Mabogunje set the pace for us as intellectuals. And he retired from strict academic work in the early 70s, and then moved on to practice. Essentially, put your money where your mouth is, you know, in a manner of speaking. And indeed, he was a scholar statesman, because we were able to see his fingerprint, his thumbprint, and his significant contributions to different facets of development in Nigeria and beyond. Next slide, please. The first was redefining development. Development usually is defined in terms of, at least from economic terms, in terms of very measurable metrics. What is the cost of living? What is the minimum wage? How many people, you know, are living in poverty? How many children are able to afford a meal a day, and all of that? But Professor Mabogunje asked us to take a closer look to the issue of development and see it beyond the issues of defining a nation's GDP to the process of moving a whole social system upwards, so as to enhance the capacity of each member of society to realize its inherent potential and to effectively cope with the changing circumstances of his life. It is essentially a human issue concerned with mobilizing communities and the whole of society to engage in the task of self-improvement with the resources available to it. And that was how Professor Mabogunje engaged with the subject of development. And I think in the context of Africa, if we are to move forward, that is how we should engage with it. It's not only about numbers. We must realize that it's people's lives that are affected, that it's people's lives that are being impacted. And also, it's going beyond, you know, approaching development from a top-down context, and understanding that people have agency, communities have agency, and are able to do for themselves. And perhaps the only time we need government is just to support us with moving up in life. And so Professor Mabogunje's approach to development was to look at development from the human angle, and my opinion is that that is the way to go. So after he left strict academia, he became a highly demanded consultant to governments and international organizations, and he provided much needed intellectual and practical support for Nigeria's development programs. Indeed, he was a quintessential scholar statesman, and we see his contributions in areas of land administration, rural development, local government, microfinance, poverty alleviation, metropolitan governance, social inclusion, new cities, regional development, and what have you. He had opinions that were grounded in science, and he recommended solutions that were practical, feasible, and scalable. Unfortunately, while many governments listened to him, many a time they did not implement his suggestions. And I think it's important for us at this time to really recognize the gift that is in our knowledge institutions and the fact that the Nigerian government and the Nigerian policy environment loses an important opportunity if they don't engage with the brains, the expertise in our universities. Next slide, please. Professor Mabogunje contributed significantly to the siting of our new capital in Abuja. He contributed his opinions and his support to the Lagos megacity development, and I think it was just last year that a commission was formed by the Lagos and Ogun State governments who sought to collaborate. He was the chairman of the Land Reforms Committee, and over again, the ideas he espoused about taking land away from the government and placing it in the hands of people to be used as an economic asset for upward trajectory, we are still yet to get to Uhuru. Regarding migration, he spoke, and for him, the idea of reversing rural-urban migration was a ridiculous one. His opinion was that if you provide services in the rural area, when people are enlightened, they will go to the city in search of prosperity for upward economic trajectory of those who were living in those societies. He gave extensive contributions to the housing and housing finance sector, to industrialization, to local government reforms. For him, you can't just name a place a local government and then put them, in the line to receive government subvention without understanding how people had been surviving, how people had been mobilizing resources, and how people had been taking advantage of their comparative economic advantage and finding a way to scale that up. He was committed to community development, as we see in his in the Ijebu-Ode poverty alleviation model. He was also committed to tertiary education, because for somebody like me, who was a third generation, who met him through the books before meeting him in person, he was able, we're able to engage with him, with his work, and with intellectual journey over and over again. He was very committed to Africa. And then he was committed to Africa, to African excellence, I will say. And it was very good of him to really encourage those of us who shared in those ideas, and to give us a bit of confidence that we were not really thinking out of the box, but that what we saw was really how things ought to be. In recognition of the urban scale, Professor Mabogunje said to us that the real problem is that the Constitution of Nigeria does not recognize the concept of the urban. And practically all our problems are tied to urban governance. And if you look around our cities today, the problem with the cities of Nigeria is really because nobody is in control of the urban. And he said most African governments don't see their urban centers as places that should be established to generate the finances needed to provide services. On rural-urban migration, he said, when people talk about migration, we must stop it. It's like stopping the wave, you know. You go to the state and say you want to stop the tide when it must come. It's impossible. By telling us that the governors are the custodians of our land, how can they be? You can't take people's land without extinguishing their rights, because if the state government says he gave you a C of O, the owners of the land then wait with their cutlass and say, tell the governor if this is his father's land, that he can, you know, simply give it out, extinguished my right without consequence. In fact, it's the problem, it's one of our problems of development. I can't even sell my land because there is no title. And that is what the land reform was about, to be able to do a systematic survey of people's land and say, this is yours, this is mine, and here's my title document agreed by government. And so that was Professor Mabogunje for us. He did not hide to speak the truth, but his truth was grounded in intellectualism. It wasn't emotive, it wasn't emotional, it was simply that, the truth. Next slide, please. And so in thinking about better African urban futures, I think the work is simple. You know, we just need to leverage on what Professor Mabogunje professed over his life, and which were simple. The first, embrace decolonial thinking. Think from your own positionality as an African in Africa. Think about the benefit to Africa. Beyond the vested interest in foreign direct investment, we also really need to think about how do our people benefit. After all, there are so many of us that any market will sell. So why not a market that pays us? And then, you know, rethinking research through multidisciplinarity and mixed methods, encouraging transdisciplinarity in urban knowledge production, whereby we're working with communities, we're working with government agencies, we're working with the business sector. And then we really need to recognize the place of cities as places of opportunity and wealth creation, and prioritize the social considerations for development, ensuring that the human well-being is at the center of the development plan. And then there's also a need for us to revisit migration and dichotomous rural-urban linkages. And regarding the issue of land reforms and land rights, we really need to sit down and have a frank discussion about, you know, what needs to be done. And we can start that discussion from the many speeches and many submissions of Professor Mabogunje. And finally, we also have to understand and recognize the scale of the urban, practice sustainable urban management, including decentralization and local governance. For me, Professor Mabogunje's intellectual submission to us encapsulated all this. And if urbanization is going to be sustainable in Africa, if we're going to be able to look forward to the next few decades and retain the essence of Africa, then we need to, you know, look at these issues that he has so brilliantly set the stage for us, and simply walk with those ideas, scale them up, and make sure that they permeate all our cities and human settlements. Thank you.
A standing ovation. Thank you for giving honor to whom honor is due. Yes, she deserves it, a standing ovation. Beautiful presentation by a beautiful woman. Thank you very much, madam. Wow. People that never knew Professor Mabogunje or his works I'm sure you are very, very much familiar with him now. Please let's appreciate Professor Lawan Singh once more. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to invite Professor B.O. Choko to present a special issue of Benin Journal of Geography, Planning and Environment, published in honor of Professor Mabogunje. Please let's give our hands together for him.
Mr. Chairman, the Vice Chancellor, University of Ibadan, Vice Chancellor, University of Lagos, other members of the High Table, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to do something in honor of Professor Mabogunje. 3 things to be done here. The first one, I give some short narrations on the Benin Journal of Geography, Planning and Environment, and the decision to honor Professor Mabogunje. Secondly, I perhaps will invite, when the time comes, Professor Mabogunje. He was a co-traveler in this journey, and we shall present or lift it up to the audience, that journal. Then thirdly, if you agree, we'll give the journal copies to members of the High Table. We also lift it up for a photo shot in honor of Professor Mabogunje. Now the first part, I can see myself as perhaps a first generation descendant of Professor Mabogunje. Because in 1976, when I left geography, University of Ibadan, for 3-4 years, we were wishing and desiring that they would teach us within our course span. Fortunately, in the last year, in 1976, Professor Mabogunje showed up to teach us urban geography. For those who were there, it was a very exciting experience to know in a very subtle, refined, and defined way issues in Nigerian urbanization, the challenges and the prospects. Now, having gone this mile, when he passed on last year, we rubbed shoulders and mind to see what to do to honor Professor Mabogunje. And we observed that he left a remarkable legacy behind as an erudite scholar who promoted the image of Ibadan, University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and Africa globally. And to do this, it might be desirable to identify the issues in Nigeria's urbanization and address them through well-researched papers and publication and the roadmap forward. So the special issue of this journal was titled Urbanization and the Environment, a practical roadmap to planning and managing Nigerian cities sustainably. Now, let's note here that 3 key concerns of Professor Mabogunje about cities in Nigeria were: 1, manageability, that cities should be managed and planned to provide the right environment aesthetically and physically to the inhabitants. Second, they should be serviceable. They should have the right services and infrastructure for the life and time of the inhabitants. Then thirdly, cities should be livable. People who live in cities ought to have the right harmonious setting and environment to do business, to live and share social life across the board. Now, if you look at these 3 issues that are very large in terms of analytical concepts and conceptualization of Nigerian urbanization, you find some level of failures. These failures in Nigerian cities are in various respects.
but very importantly, the capitalistic takeover of land for all kinds of development without proper planning and management. And in the course of all this, we have several issues we raised in this journal. Urbanization surge, growth chaos, and suffocating cities. The dearth of controlled development in cities. Small space urban grabbing, particularly in the informal sector, that introduces a lot of random development in cities in a very confused and unaesthetically pleasing way to those who observe it closely. We also have issues of limited leisure and recreational lands, green spaces, open spaces that are being lost to development, and this decreases substantially the quality of life of cities and their inhabitants. The issues of widespread physical urban decay, the mutilation of urban character through random development, distortion, degradation of previously well-planned GRAs across Nigeria. Now, this is notable because the colonial era, to appear that in spite of the segregation of development between the indigenous areas and the colonial areas, those spaces in the GRAs, or government reservation areas, were well laid out and planned, but across cities in Nigeria today, you find that they've been markedly distorted and destroyed, and the character lost altogether. In view of this, the journal saw a number of things to be addressed. The first one, space governance. We need to govern space properly to ensure that small spaces are managed to the comfort of the economy and the people. Secondly, the need to implement space rules. Space rules should be adhered to by all, and faithfully, otherwise there'll be chaos in development. Then thirdly, the political will to actually drive urban centers and their development. We also found that to achieve all this, we should have some very laudable vision about cities. Just like the guest speakers said, this vision should be well defined in social context, economic context, physical context, and all those who are involved, stakeholders, should ensure that they follow faithfully over time the development of cities. This we regard as the developmental state, where the leaders and those who are managing cities and spaces stay faithful to the rules and ensure that there is reasonable action. Now, the special issue, there are three things we did in this special issue. The first one, the first part, identify all these issues as we just mentioned in terms of urbanization, social welfare, cultural welfare, in terms of urban green space, in terms of urban agriculture, in terms of even access to energy in cities. That first part shows that there are critical issues in Nigeria that ought to be taken seriously for the welfare of cities and development. And second part, series of case studies, empirical analysis of urbanization issues, about land use, about urban growth, about services, about open space, about planning. All these were taken from various parts of Nigeria, analyzed to give a picture that is clear about the trends and issues of Nigeria's urbanization. Then the third part explored in a more practical way in hands-on solution method, planning and policy. Planning papers on planning and policy that can address issues identified and that are implementable in context of planners, urban managers, and other stakeholders, and even agencies outside Nigeria that may take interest in cities. So overall, I want to commend the University of Ibadan through the Department of Geography and the Mabogunje Legacy Committee for the vision that we shared between Benin and Ibadan to come out with this special issue to address Nigeria's urbanization trends and challenges. In doing this, I want to acknowledge, in particular, Professor Isaac Megbologbe of Johns Hopkins University, a descendant of Professor Mabogunje, who took deep interest in this special issue and also facilitated the discourse and exchange between Ibadan and Benin City. I also want to acknowledge my good friend, Professor Mabogunje. He's actually a good driver. He showed a passion. He took interest in the review process and drew across the period we shared to ensure that we had quality output analysis and content for this journal. I also want to acknowledge the fact that the University of Ibadan, through the Geography Department and the Legacy Committee, funded fully the process of advertising for these special issues for papers to be submitted and the printing and publication of this journal. We value this kind of exchange between universities that give us a hope that things can actually be done and done better. We also acknowledge staff of the Department of Geography, University of Ibadan, for their efforts in review processes. I want to acknowledge the Vice Chancellor, University of Benin, Professor Lilian Salami, for his support. And I also want to acknowledge and appreciate very deeply the family of Professor Mabogunje that gave this platform for us to have this special issue, and whose distinguished daughter is currently Vice Chancellor, University of Lagos. We appreciate you all for the efforts. And I must say that if you go through the journal, you find that scholars, young and old, took interest, and all regions of Nigeria were involved in the process of submitting papers for assessment and the final presentation. So that's the first part, to let you know the history of this journal, how we came about it. I would now like to invite Professor Mabogunje to this podium. I hope he's around, with a copy of the journal. A copy of the journal. So, thank you. So, really, since it was actually a joint effort, it is very important and symbolic to raise it up together as a mark of collaboration and partnership. Then the last segment is for all those on the high table to have copies and perhaps raise it up if you agree for a photo shot in memory of Professor Akinlawon Ladipo. Thank you. So, thank you very much for this session. I believe that stakeholders will have access to this journal for reading and perhaps implementation. Thank you.
So, on behalf of the University of Ibadan, in collaboration with the University of Benin, it's a pleasure to announce that this journal will be distributed free to everybody present at this occasion. Thank you very much.
However, there are books and other publications by Professor Mabogunje that are available for sale outside. We have A Measure of Grace, the autobiography of Akinlawon Ladipo Mabogunje. It goes for 15,000 naira for the hard copy, and 10,000 for the soft copy. We have Foundations for Urban Development in Africa, The Legacy of Mabogunje. It goes notes by Akinlawon Ladipo, and it goes for 5,000 naira. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there is another publication that somebody is going to review and present, and that is the Egba Palimpsest. It's my pleasure to invite the immediate past dean. Thank you.
The chair of this occasion, my Vice Chancellor, kindly grant me the honor of adopting the existing protocol. But I have to start this book review by acknowledging especially two individuals. The first is Professor Mabogunje, who is not in our midst today, but whose work will live forever. I also want to acknowledge Professor Bolanle Awe. There is a relationship. Professor Bolanle Awe brought me to this university, and then Professor Mabogunje turned me into an urban historian. So I must acknowledge the two of them. The book that I've been asked to review is the last work of Baba Mabogunje, and it was published in the year 2022. And I doubt if any of you have this book with you. The book was published by Book Builders Editions Africa here in Ibadan, and it is 329 pages. The original document from which the book was produced was submitted as a Master's of Arts thesis to the University of London in 1958 with the title, The Changing Pattern of Rural Settlement and Rural Economy in Egba Division, Southwestern Nigeria. It was revised to capture more issues, most especially the urbanization of Abeokuta. The end product, now titled Egba Palimpsest, is mouthful. The story of Egba land from the 19th century devastation to the colonial period consists of 10 intertwined chapters. The first introduces the entire work, first and foremost by problematizing some of the keywords in the presentation. In this book, under review, is that of a society that retains its core cultural characteristics despite different forces of social, economic, and political transformations, with a view to clearly establishing its own contribution to knowledge and giving the book under review the right historical background. Baba Mabogunje focused the second chapter on the review of some existing works on the Egba people, with some special attention given to Saburi Biobaku's The Egba and Their Neighbors, 1842 to 1872, published in 1957. He then focused the third chapter on how the different Egba refugee groups, most especially from or through Ibadan, settled in Abeokuta, with Sodeke, the leader of the Egba Alake, constituting the vanguard. Chapter 4 is focused on the physical, demographic, and economic expansion of the different Egba communities, while the fifth focuses on the agricultural revolution and changed land tenure experienced by the people. These historic changes, most especially the rapid urbanization witnessed by the people, were caused by their early contact with the Christian missionaries, who were initially referred to as Sierra Leone immigrants, but indeed liberated slaves of Egba extraction that had returned home. Chapter 6 focuses on how the Egba groups traded in rural and urban markets up to Lagos, Badagry, and organized long-distance trade across Yoruba communities up to Ilorin. The focus of the 7th chapter is on the impact of the people's heterogeneity and rapid urbanization as Abeokuta soon started to rank side by side with Ibadan as the two mega communities in Yoruba land following the crisis of the 19th century. The two communities innovated chieftaincy systems for sizing up to their statuses. The war history of Ibadan enabled it to easily agree on two chieftaincy lines, the civil and military, with each of the lines leading to the Oba rank. The situation was different in Abeokuta, where each of the groups settled with continuing loyalties to their pristine settlements. Attempts to forge a system that could include all groups led to the emergence of 5 governance era in the history of Abeokuta from 1830 to 1914. This provided the background to today's independent chieftaincy traditions in Abeokuta. The 8th chapter focuses on how the political, economic, and social systems in Egba land were further refined by the British colonial administration. The community urbanized more rapidly with the arrival of the railway in Abeokuta, and the rural communities became more prosperous with cultivation of cash crops for export and root crops for feeding the rapidly expanding population. This motivated scramble for